Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a little while, but welcome back to Beyond the Production, Opera San Antonio's live interview series, taking artists off the stage and into the community to share their experiences in the operatic arts. My name is Lauren Meeker, and I'm the General and Artistic Director of Opera San Antonio. And joining me, as always, is my amazing partner in crime, Francesco Milioto, who is our music director here at OSA. Hi, Francesco.
Hi, Lauren. How are you today?
I am excellent. And I also have to give you an extra plug today because you're wearing two hats. You're not only here as someone who's been my cohort with these interviews, but you are also here to be interviewed today because you're conducting our spring production of Lucia di Lammermoor, which is what today's episode will be all about.
Excited.
So I'm excited, and mostly to be back in live performance with you is going to be extraordinary. And to start to talk about that today is going to be just filling my heart with such joy. So for those who are watching, I want to say thank you for joining us live today, or for watching the interview later. Our interviews all remain up on Opera San Antonio's YouTube channel and on Opera San Antonio's Facebook page. And all of them can be found, if you're on YouTube, underneath the playlist Beyond the Production. Okay, so for this episode, I had really asked Francesco for you to dive deeply into the history and musical background of Lucia di Lammermoor, which for those who are watching and may not know, this is Donizetti's bel canto masterpiece. We'll talk more about him. We'll talk more about what bel canto means today. But long story short, we're producing a highlights concert version of Lucia with a rock star cast.
Yes.
This spring at the Tobin Center on May 6th and 8th. So I hope all of you will learn a little bit today and also will then come join us at the Tobin Center this spring. And when we were preparing for this interview, Francesco, you talked about wanting the discussion to really bubble to life by having a guest join us who could speak to the amazing history of this opera, to the orchestration behind this opera, and go, I think, toe for toe with you on the musical background. Is that a fair assessment, Francesco?
I think that is more than fair.
I love it. Okay, so what we have done is asked another brilliant and wonderful maestro who we both know and love to join us. Here he is. Hello, Maestro Anthony.
There he is.
How are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. I'm better now that I get to facilitate the conversation of dueling maestri.
Oh my God.
Which I'm looking forward to.
No idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, you have no idea what you're in for here.
I know. Our guests are in for a real treat, both knowledge-wise and just, I think, pure enjoyment-wise. So our guests, people who are watching, many of them have been with us before, and I'm sure they're familiar with me, and I'm sure they're familiar with Francesco. Oh, we're all getting people like Rita Luna is saying, hi, y'all. I think we all know her.
Mail coming in yet?
Various places. Veronica says, Maestro, who's on our staff here misses being in live performance and misses Francesco as much as I do. Tammy Serrano, who's done a bunch of shows with us. She's been in our chorus. Yes. Hi, Tammy. It's been a while. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining, everyone. Okay. I know you as Tony, so it's hard for me to not call you Tony.
I know. We've done this. And I know you as Lori. So
guests and Francesco are learning something new about me today. Please don't send me emails addressing me as Lori.
Oh my God.
But Tony and I go way back. So Tony, before we even get there,
okay,
you have roots in San Antonio.
I do have roots in San Antonio. I went to my undergraduate degree was at Trinity University. I'm a proud Tiger. Trinity is one of the finest 4 years in my memory. I loved going there. I was a music composition major. I also took Italian there, and I studied abroad a semester. All these things that happened to me happened really because I went to Trinity. It's such a, and when I was in Trinity, there was no San Antonio opera. We went to the symphony every week, and we had what we call a Valentine, which was our student ID card, and you would just show up to the symphony at the Emerson Majestic Theater with your card, and you would get a free ticket. They gave free tickets to music students. It was crazy.
Wow.
But if I wanted to go see opera, we had to drive either to Austin or Houston. Once I drove to Dallas, but I really want. But the San Antonio Symphony would do a concert opera once a year. We saw. I remember a Bohème, but there was no San Antonio Symphony at that time. This is in the 90s. So yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah. We're only a 6-year-old company. There have been other companies in the history of San Antonio, but not a huge presence for opera companies in really like the last 30, almost pushing 40 years. So that's part of why I think what we're going to talk about today is so exciting, because even when we're doing what in the opera niche world, we consider, well-known masterpieces like Lucia, that hasn't been seen here in a really, really long time. And many of the top 10 rep sort of pieces, or even the top 20, haven't been done here in quite some time. So what seems second nature to all of us is really new and extraordinary, I think, when we're entering this world. So what I love about the three of us being here today is, so we know, Anthony, you've got roots here. You and I met in Boston, I think way back.
2002.
Oh, you can look it up. 2002. Yeah. Okay. With a Boston Lyric Opera production of Carmen on the Common. It was an outdoor show, something we know a lot about now in COVID.
Yeah. Oh God, no kidding. Right. Yeah.
And then, so I actually think we met before you and Francesco met. Is that true?
Years before. I was still living in New York at that time. Yeah. You were, I think, assistant stage manager.
Me, I was the assistant stage manager at the time.
Yeah. I was chorus master. You were like 18. You were so young. No, you look the same. I mean, it's crazy. Like, it was the summer of 2000, or it was like at the very end of the summer of 2002.
Yes,
like,
it was.
Yeah.
So here we all are, having come a long, long way since those early days. Thank goodness.
Yes.
And now getting to breathe such fabulous life into this. I am so excited, I have to say. Sue Turner, who is one of our most consistent patrons and donors. She attends all our events, is just joining us via via YouTube. And Sue, hello. We're so excited to see you for being here. Okay. So where to start is always, I think, the great question. I also want to say, Tony, I didn't quite finish your lineage and history. So not only are you not a chorus master at Boston Lyric Opera anymore, but you are also now music director of Opera Delaware. And you are also the artistic director of Opera Southwest, where you fantastically engaged me for a Lohengrin, which is going to come up again later in conversation, reasons that are going to tie into Lucia. Anyway, that's why we think Maestro is brilliant, or both of you are brilliant, I should say. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Can one of you help define Donizetti in terms of who he is as a composer, and more specifically, bel canto repertoire? What does that mean? Why is that, I think it's such romantic and gorgeous music, but what does that even mean? Francesco, I'm going to punt that to you first, and then Barrese, we can go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for being here, Tony. Tony, so everybody knows on the show, Tony is the person that whenever I have a bel canto question or an orchestration question or anything like, this is the guy that I call so that I can have a discussion. And let's just say, when I have strong feelings about something and I need to put myself in check, let's just say it that way, Tony Barrese is
my wife always knows when I'm on the phone with you. She doesn't even have to hear like your name. You're talking to Francesco, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I love having these conversations. This is why I wanted to invite Tony, because I think our listeners will get not only a kick out of listening to the two of us go back and forth, but the amount of knowledge that you have and the specialty that you have in this repertoire, I think is special and important, and it's something that I use as a resource all the time. So getting back to this, and we've discussed this so many times, just to give a little bit of history, this opera is premiered in 1835 in Naples. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but I think I'm right. This is sort of in the retirement period of Rossini, and this is when Donizetti really would have been the Italian composer.
Yeah, he and Bellini. I mean, Rossini was already out of Italy. He was already in France.
Right.
And it was really Bellini It's weird. We think of it as Bellini and Donizetti, but there was Mercadante, there was Pacini, there were all these other guys that were hugely famous. But yeah, the ones we remember now, Donizetti for sure.
Yeah, no, and for me, like this going back to, I mean, he was also in France at the time rewriting another opera. I can't remember which one it is, but I know that he was in France and was asked to do the French version of this also, which we don't really need to talk about, but it does exist.
Yes,
we have so many to talk about in the Italian version for Naples, and I know you have some stories about glass harmonica and flute and everything else.
Sure.
But for me, this repertoire, when I called Tony and we discussed this repertoire, for me, Tony also just mentioned briefly that he's a composer, and I think that is an extremely great gift to have. And I want to ask you about rewriting cadenzas and adapting things as would have been done. I think people, we're so minded on doing come scritto in a lot of things.
Which means what, Francesco?
As written, sorry, as the composer wrote, or not even just as the composer wrote, as we have the papers that have been handed down.
That's it.
Not necessarily always what the composer intended,
right,
or what the style was, or what you sort of highlighted in that particular singer that day. And I have to say that the amount of creativity, flexibility, and just the way these performances, these productions were really living representations of what you were given regarding singers, regarding staging, we talked about staging. Staging was not practically non-existent in this time. You'd sit down in the stage, you'd do a pose, and then you would be, whatever you were doing. But that also means that the focus was on the singing.
Yes. Yeah.
So for me, the entire approach is always going to be to maximize the singer that you have in front of you, maximize the ensemble you have in front of you.
Sure.
Do what is best for them. Adjust it. Just case in point, we were just discussing this before we came live. The Mad Scene, originally written in F, but also for singers or whoever, for normal mere mortals that are already extremely talented, taken down to E flat, even though some people still do it in F. Just things like that, transposition, things that you would say like, hey, let's transpose Papageno because it's like a little too high. Everyone would be like, what?
I know.
What? People
it's like touching the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
So I just want people to know the amount of flexibility that there was. And I want you to talk a little bit about that. And you being a composer, having the experience of rewriting these cadenzas being moments when the accompaniment will stop and the singer will have like a highlighted set of runs and trills and whatever it is that, of course, hopefully stays in character and is in touch with the music that we just did. But that I think that's important to talk about and to really realize that the singers and the conductor and the pianist, the music, whoever it was working on it, did a lot more sort of creative live working in the moment to bring these things to life. And I want you to talk about, a good example of that is your composing and recomposing some of those cadenzas for particular singers to maximize.
So I just want to jump in before you respond, Tony, to say two things. One, I think everybody watching should know that we are using your orchestration here for Lucia this spring. Yes. So that's part of where Francesco is coming from, because you are so intimately associated with this particular musical structure for the opera, in addition to having the historical knowledge that Francesco is pointing to. But before you dive into historical knowledge or flexibility of the piece, literally, what does bel canto mean, Maestro?
Go ahead.
It literally means beautiful singing, which is sort of that's why it's such a vapid term. Like who doesn't, there isn't like a brutto canto period of music, but there's certainly not one that's celebrated. So I think I do think it points to something where the voice is supreme, and then you get little by little, the orchestra becomes more important to the point where it arguably becomes even more important by by Wagner and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's a period of dominance where the singing is really the most important thing, which really is the beginning of opera until the late middle, late the 19th century. So it is kind of, it's an odd, Rossini talked about the bel canto period, but he was talking about, Cimarosa, and he was talking about Mozart. Yeah, I mean, everyone's always talking about, oh, it was so great just about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It was the heyday of opera,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious now to pick up on the thread that Francesco started, which is talking about flexibility in the piece. And because certainly we are in a unique position here of, being one of a few opera companies in the nation right now who's going back into indoor live performance. Yay. Oh my gosh. It's terrifying and exciting. Please come see the show. But what that opened the door to was a lot of conversation, because we have to be in a 90-minute format. Right. About how to be flexible and evolve the piece. So I'm not suggesting that for all due time, everybody should do a 90-minute version of Lucia. That is not what I'm suggesting. However, what I have really enjoyed about the conversations with Francesco, and I know he's been having those with you, is that you are two maestri who are so historically knowledgeable. And what my experience has been in opera is when you hit a history buff or a music buff, the desire is often to clamp down on come scritto, whatever they interpret that to mean. Y'all are so much more flexible. Please go into that. Please go Barrese.
As scholarly as Frank and I are, you have to remember that you're talking to two conductors, one of which has conducted wearing a Spider-Man outfit underneath his tuxedo, and one of which has conducted wearing a Darth Vader outfit. And I won't tell you which one is which. So to the extent that we're both very serious about our art, we also know that at the end of the day, the show had, one of the best things about Frank is he is such a practical conductor. It's like, we don't have 3 trombones. We got 2 trombones. Great. We'll do it with 2 trombones. And opera is, Laura, it's just compromise all across the board. You start with wanting this, and if you get this, you're never going to get everything you want.
No, it's a negotiation.
It's completely negotiation. And especially
we're lawyers. We're not even conductors. Right. We're lawyers.
Donizetti wrote these things so fast. I mean, people talk about Rossini's speed, but he wrote like 39 operas. Donizetti wrote almost something like 70 operas.
Yeah, almost 70 up, 60.
And he died young. That's the crazy thing. And I think it's important for people to remember that when you went to the opera back then, you didn't go to see Lucia or Don Giovanni. You saw what it was like going to the movies. You saw the movie that was out now, and then when that was done, you went to see the next one, and then you went to see the next. Martin Scorsese keeps making new movies because he want, and you don't always see old movies. The public wants something new, and in order for there to be something new, you got to be able to just kind of cram these things together. It's like a Hollywood, shooting schedule. It's rigid, it's tight, and then when it's done, you move on to the next thing. And there's cuts and there's additions and there's all kinds of things that happen in the moment, all the way up until to the opening night. Things are being edited, things are being rehearsed. The opening of, I think it was Cenerentola, they didn't even have time to practice the duet between the two buffos, and they had to he wrote it the night before, and they had to rehearse it between acts 1 and 2. And I mean, this kind of thing happened all the time. And Lucia is such an amazing piece, and it does have a lot of things that we definitely associate with it, and we have to do all the time. But then there are other things that like Frank was talking about. We just transpose things. We completely eliminate. I mean, I know you guys are under time limit with the 90-minute thing, but the Wolfskrag scene is almost always completely eliminated, and it's a major important scene in the opera. But I just think that Lucia has so many things that people think. It was so great when Francesco said, it's not necessarily come scritto, it's how people think it's written, or it's the Dover published score. We have the score. It's not what Donizetti wrote. It's what an editor took and the decisions that they made. But when you start digging deeper and deeper, there's a lot of stuff that we just take for granted that Donizetti wrote it that way. Not only did he not write it that way, but some editor years later wrote it that way, and we take it now as gospel truth. And people kind of, and I really blame recordings for this. People, singers especially, really they get stuck on their recording of it that they like, or the way they did it before, and it just doesn't change. And there's nothing more. I love bel canto music, but the most frustrating thing for me about bel canto music is when someone says, "Oh, I've done the role before." I'm like, no, that means you're coming to it with so much I want to always come at this as if like none of us have done this before, and I want it to feel that way. And if you can't sing it because this is too difficult, it's too high, we'll change it. I'm really about making, if no one's gonna care. I'm not gonna look like an idiot if you crack your high note. You're the one that's gonna sound terrible. Like it's gonna be. You've got to make everybody look good.
Yeah. Do you know what? I want to add one thing to that.
Sure.
Is that, having spoken, obviously to a lot of coaches and a lot of people about this repertoire and working, both of us, I really have to say the thing that like blew my mind about like really, really old recordings, when you listen to like the earliest representations that we have of these pieces, I'm amazed at what was not sung, the cuts that were made. So
yes. Oh my God.
The cuts that were made so that a particular tenor or like a particular singer could make it through the role.
Yeah.
And that is something that we rarely talk about. Now I've done so many productions, even of Mozart in major opera houses or whatever it is, no cuts.
No cuts.
Yeah.
No cuts. Yeah. No one wants to do cuts. You just sent me something. Didn't you just send me an article that was like Puccini's cuts to Meistersinger? Was it you that sent that to me?
No, you sent that to me.
Oh, I sent it to you. Never mind.
Yeah.
But like the amount of things that were cut to work around what a singer was comfortable singing. Of course, right, you want to do everything, you can do it, but imagine the broader amount of like the broader range of singers you could have even doing this if things were adjusted, transposed, composed, and cut appropriately for those people. I mean, it's such an interesting thing to learn about that. But I do want you to talk about this cadenza that you were writing. You just the freedom to even do that as a composer, first of all, but as someone who knows how all of these things were done and making adjustments to maximize the singer that you have in front of you. I mean, that is like a breath of fresh air, like un respiro proprio of relaxation. It must be, no?
I mean, I certainly want it to always be that way. I always come to these things with these really high ideals. And the first time I did the Lucia, I just said to the singer and the flute player, I got him in a room. I said, all right, this is going to be great. You're going to I want to do this whole thing where, whatever you do, she responds to it. And then when she does it, you do it. And I want it to like have a real playfulness. And I want it to like change from night to night. I want you to feel the freedom to cut. And they were both like, can you just write it out? Yeah. And I was just like, oh, come on, but and I haven't and I think that the second time I did it, the singer just really wanted to do the traditional one. But I keep wanting to, like, I'm always going to come at it with like, let's try something different. And I understand if I mean, again, it's not me up there singing, it's them. But right. I want it to feel, a cadenza should feel improvisatory because it should be improvisatory. And there's this whole section at the end, or sort of near the very end of the Mad Scene, where it's just her and the flute, and none of this is written in his score. No, it's I think it was written by Ricci like years later.
No, it's like I think somebody from 1888, 1880 something. I can't remember.
Decades after
cadenza. Decades.
Yeah,
this standard,
and this has become the way that
after he died.
Way after he died, and it's become the way he's done. And so I'm positive that, especially back then, it would have been improvised, and it would have had a real feel of give and take, and it would have felt a lot more like jazz than classical music. At least to our ears, it would have been like, oh, that's. But when we go to hear Lucia, if we know Lucia even a little bit, it's so rare that like you hear something different. You kind of go, oh yeah, that's the cadenza that Joan Sutherland did, or whatever. And I love Joan Sutherland, but I don't want to hear her cadenza anymore. I want to hear someone else's cadenza. I want to hear something different. And I always want, but I think a lot of that has to do with like singers are not encouraged in any way in conservatory to like really, they don't take composition. They don't, singers used to take composition and they would learn how to piano, exactly. And they would learn how to improvise, and they would like improvise off a figured bass, and they would just do lots of these things that were part of their, as much a part of their training as this. And that's just totally lost. So the only chance you got is to really encourage singers to like look at the different kinds of ornaments that these guys wrote. Like Rossini wrote several different ornaments for his operas, and Donizetti did too. And there's just and we're getting to know more and more about this. And the more people know about it, the more they can kind of feel a freedom to do it. And well, yeah. So that's, I mean, I can confirm,
I'm going to interject because I think now would be a good time for anybody who's maybe not with Lucia. I'm going to give a real quick, like, here's what the story is about. Because what you guys are circling around, you've referenced a couple of times Lucia's mad scene and specifically the cadenza. And we've heard the words flute and glass harmonica dropped. Yes. So I want to put all of that in context so people know more about where the next section of this conversation is headed. So if you don't know Lucia, do not fear. You probably know more about it than you think you do. And what I mean by that is it's really a Scottish Romeo and Juliet at the most basic level. Okay. The piece itself was it's based on source material. Written, Sir Walter Scott wrote The Bride of Lammermoor in 1819. That's the foundation, or what we call the source material for the piece. So we're dealing with a Scottish by Italian composer turned into a bel canto opera story, but nevertheless, you know, it's Romeo and Juliet with some more things thrown in, like there's a ghost, there's some fake news, there's a murder, she goes insane. There's like, so it's like Romeo and Juliet spiked up a couple notches. Now, specifically, when you guys are talking Lucia, mad scene, and cadenza, what happens is basically Lucia wants to marry Edgardo. Her brother's like, nope, go marry this dude, and go marry this dude Arturo. And a lot of the opera to get up to the mad scene is spent watching Lucia be like really pushed and pulled through dominating masculine forces, which Lauren Meeker, the female stage director, will save for another discussion. But the long story short is, there's a mental break with her on the wedding night where she is forced to consummate the wedding with Arturo, which results in her, spoiler alert, murdering Arturo. And when she hears, we dive into what is probably arguably the most famous section of material from Lucia, which is her mad scene. And it's just a spectacular, like incredibly long, both vocal, emotional roller coaster and mental emotional roller coaster. And there are parts that are structured like you're talking about. There's also parts where there are cadenza, which are the more improvisatorial section that you guys have been referencing. Now, gentlemen, with all of that in mind, go the next step for me and talk a little bit more about this conversation we love to get to in the opera world, which is flute, glass harmonica. What's the difference? How do we choose? What's the history?
Go, Tony.
Okay, so briefly, Donizetti wrote the part, the accompaniment part for the mad scene for a glass harmonica. In his original manuscript, he wrote out a very careful part for this instrument. It's not. I mean, it's kind of hard to describe what a glass harmonica is. I mean, Maestro, if you want to look it up while I'm doing this, and you can make me look.
No. I mean,
do you want to talk about what a glass harmonica is?
No,
I think just give like a quick little sense of what it is, and then we can move forward from there.
Yeah, so it's just right now I'm just basically Googling it because I've never. Yeah, I mean it's just this. It's like a. I mean, it's a series of glass bowls or goblets.
It's just exactly
kind of rub, and they make. Right. I mean, if you think of like a bunch of beer bottles that are, it's not like that, but it's more like wine bottles.
Like,
that are filled with
like crystal glass. Glass.
And it has this kind of crystal glass kind of sound. And so he wrote it for this because it was this very eerie, ethereal idea. And at some point he canceled that out and he wrote it. He changed it for a flute. And there's been lots of speculation on why he did this and why was this, that, and the other thing. The San Carlo had a glass harmonica player by the name of Domenico Pezzi, and he played in the same season as Lucia. He played some ballet. He was playing the glass harmonica in it. And at some point, he had a fight with management, and they switched out the glass harmonica part for the flute. And they had a big, long, ugly court battle about this. And at some point, he clearly pissed off the management enough that they said to Donizetti, look, just rewrite it for a flute. Like we don't work. This guy is a real pain. So that's why it kind of went to flute. And now there's been a big movement to bring it. There we go. There we
go.
You can see a couple different options here, just so people have a sense it looks
And
like.
I honestly don't know what the one that Donizetti would have written for would have looked like, but I would imagine.
Yeah, it's just you kind of rub it, and it does sound like crystal glass. So really, until very recently, it was always done with a flute, and now there are a couple people in opera world who make a kind of a nice, side gig going around doing this. It's I wouldn't say it's becoming the dominant form, but it's certainly not unheard of these days to hear a glass harmonica do it. And if you think about it, it's a very ethereal kind of sounding instrument. I mean, so is flute in some ways, but this is way weirder sounding, and especially if she's going nuts, it really accompanies it quite well.
So we grabbed a couple of short clips, which I think this is a good point to introduce them so that folks that are watching today can hear the difference between the flute in the same section against the glass harmonica. So I'm going to start with our clip that is actually grabbing a production that Joan Sutherland was in, and this is going to be with the flute. So take a listen to this little 30-second clip real quick. Great. And then for reference, we actually grabbed a clip of Brenda Ray, who will be our Lucia in San Antonio this spring. She's done the production recently with the Santa Fe Opera, and they have some phenomenal YouTube clips from their production. If anybody's interested, go check her out on YouTube. But here's that same section. Santa Fe Opera used the glass harmonica. So let's listen to the difference. Oh, sorry, she doubled there. That was my bad. I hear a difference. It's interesting. Even when we were talking yesterday, it's been a while since I've studied Lucia, and I haven't done it with a glass harmonica. I've always had a flute player. And it was really fascinating to sit down and listen all the way through to a variety of mad scene interpretations yesterday. And it does have an ethereal, different sound to it, different structure.
It really does. I mean, I was in Santa Fe during that production. I went to see it many times, especially at first, just to go to the rehearsals to listen to really hear. I never heard one like live in the room, for the rehearsals and things. It's a special thing. And I can see why, certain composers, Puccini, anybody, others also had instruments or newer instruments or instruments that they had created for a particular sound. What you can basically just say the same thing for Wagner tuba kind of thing like that. But people would take advantage of that. Whatever was popular at the time. I'm sure it's not just Lucia that the glass harmonicas in 1835 were being used for. So, I think it's an incredible sound, but sometimes the practicality of it with and I mean, I love the story of the glass harmonica player getting upset and
just being a jerk and no one
scratch it out and just write the flute. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah. But those are the kinds of things you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we've been talking about in preparation for today is also in line with that conversation about how facile the piece is and how much it would change going into opening. Tony, you were saying some really interesting things about the tenor and music that's been rewritten. I wonder if you could explore that a little bit more.
Well, yeah. So the first guy who sang this was a guy by the name of Gilbert Dupré. He was a famous French singer, and he was famous for being the first guy to sing a high C the way that we know of a high C. You know, full throated, in chest voice. The way it used to be would sing a high C. A tenor would get to the high C and they go, you know, in a falsetto kind of voice, or they would mix it a little bit. It was nothing like the powerful, really virile high C that we come to associate with modern tenor singing. And Dupré was, he came to fame in France in like the 1830s, singing the role of Arnauld in William Tell. And he made this famous, doing this high C and the way that we hear a high C. Rossini hated it. He thought it was just disgusting. But he became really, famous for this. And then so he kind of went all over the Europe singing William Tell, and then Donizetti heard him. He thought he was great, and he wrote this role for him. And there's not only a high C, there's a high E flat. I believe there's a high F. There's so many crazy high notes in this that that a lot of people just do not take because they're just way too high.
No. Yeah.
But he kind of was just game for it, or he just had this freakish, voice. And now we take it for granted that any tenor worth his salt has a decent high C,
Yeah.
But I just think that's fascinating. Like the connection, like he was the first guy to do it, and then he became known. Then they even, he did a C, and then Donizetti's like, well, I'll give him a D, I'll give him an E flat. I'll try an F. Like
just so Italian.
Yeah. Let's see how good you really are.
Yeah. I mean, but that E flat at the end of that duet is, in the little cadenza, the little cadenza that comes down. They come in six. It's just.
It's crazy.
You hear it. When you hear someone do it, you're just like, what? It's an amazing thing. Oh my God.
Neat.
But it's interesting to say that, also it's interesting that these composers also knew who the cast would be, even when they were writing these pieces, or as they were writing, they would handpick all of the things as we do now. But of course, they were able to sort of write for them. And this brings us to like full circle to the other point. Just because Gilbert could do it doesn't mean everybody else could do it.
No. Yeah.
The composer would just be like, okay, can't sing an E flat. Here's a C.
I always say if like Donizetti could come back today and he saw that you're doing Lucia, first of all, he'd say, why are you doing this?
Why are you doing it the same way that I just
do a new piece? He would just the idea, the concept to him would just be completely foreign. But if he came back and he's like, Brendere, I would make her a cadenza. He might write a whole different aria for her.
Yeah.
And that kind of flexibility. So like, I guarantee you that if there was there wasn't COVID back then, but there were outbreaks of cholera all the time. And if he had to do a cholera safe, production of Lucia, and they said, you only have 90 minutes, he would have absolutely made cuts and he would have been completely fine with this. There's no question.
Yeah. I mean, the point is to perform. The point is to work out there. I mean, also the point is to get paid, but the point is to
Let's talk a little bit about getting back into performance.
Yes.
And I'm going to dovetail this interestingly to a conversation that or an experience that I had rather with you, Tony, at Opera Southwest. So where we are in COVID times in particular right now, if you're choosing to perform indoor, and this is not opera specific, but it definitely applies to opera, is that most folks and companies that are choosing to go back indoor for live performance are capping performances at about the 90-minute mark, give or take, because that helps with health and safety and air ventilation and audience flow and a variety of other things. So we've decided to do a 90-minute version here. But the other thing that's tough about producing opera during COVID is the health and safety measures that need to be taken, not only for the audience and for the backstage staff, but in some ways even more carefully crafted around musicians and singers. who, if you're not deep inside opera, you may or may not know that opera singers in particular are considered super spreaders. We use a lot of lung power. I said we, like I'm an opera singer. I'm not an opera singer. Opera singers use a lot of lung power, and therefore there's a lot of potential for interchange of air from artist to artist. And so our rules around how to keep people health and safety simply take up a lot more space than it used to. Yeah. So the days of being able to do, let's say, Lucia in a sort of traditional sense, meaning your 7 principal players, a chorus of somewhere between 30 and 40, maybe in a normal year, plus a full orchestra in the pit, who, mind you, would be in front of all those super spreaders. Right. It's not where it's possible right now. So one of the things that we've looked at doing here is, how do we make the most not only musically engaging evening, but also still artistically and dramatically engaging evening, even though we're playing in a whole new health and safety sandbox. Mm-hmm. And I have to actually credit the experience that we had together, Tony, at Opera Southwest. I've been engaged to direct a Lohengrin, which was conceived as a full production. And I don't want to spin the whole conversation out to that experience, but for reasons that were beyond our control, the full production was not possible. And we were shifting gears really quickly.
Our theater had a fire, we should say.
We should say the theater had a fire, which meant rehearsals and performance in the month that we had structured was just not going to be feasible. So we were finding a new performance venue and finding a new way to bring it to life. And the result was essentially a semi-staged concert, which is where we're ending up here very similarly on Lucia, given all of the things that we're working with. And what that means for anybody who's watching is that for this production, the orchestra will be on stage. The cast will be playing out the scene. The principal cast will be in front of the orchestra in costume, interacting, but in a distanced way, and presenting what I think the most extraordinary music from the piece. Thank you, Francesco and Tony. What we found really interesting with the Lohengrin, and this is where I'd love to have you speak a little more to this, Tony, is that I remember hearing several audience members at Opera Southwest being really fascinated by the opportunity to see what the individual musicians were going through, to see how you as a conductor were interacting with them, and also to see how that then married into the cast, not only vocal choices, but staging choices. Can you give us a little more feedback on what that experience was like, or some of the things that you all heard in response at Opera Southwest?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in the beginning, it was just such a downer. I thought, I've been working for years to get this Lohengrin to happen, and in my mind, it's unless it's in a proscenium theater with the orchestra in the pit, it hasn't really happened. But a couple of things happened with that experience. One, we got into the best acoustic probably in New Mexico, in this concert hall that was out of this world. But also, our orchestra is so great, but putting them on the stage, they felt more a part of people took a little bit more, I think, pride in the whole process, as we are part of the production. We're not just sort of stuffed in the pit here. And so everyone, they had to kind of behave themselves a little bit better. Everyone just had to be a little bit more present and a little bit more attentive, because they were not just playing the music. They were also in some ways a character on stage, acting on stage. And so it was a much more musically satisfying experience than I would have had I been in the pit, and had we had a gigantic swan flying across the stage, and all the stuff that would have made it a great piece of theater would have made it much more difficult to be musical. But being on the stage and the singer hearing the oboe, oh yeah, that's the part where I come in here. Everything was a lot more organic and magical. And the way you guys are doing it, we were talking about this last night, is Donizetti, there was no pit in Donizetti's time. The orchestra was at the front of the stage, on the level of the audience, and staging, it was not very concept oriented. They just kind of sang, and they were in costumes and they sang. And so the Lucia that your audience is going to see is probably very close to the kind of Lucia that the San Carlo audience would have seen, because again, there was no pit, and the orchestra would have been completely visible.
Tony, are you telling me, who likes to be forward thinking and relevant, that I'm ending up staging a Lucia that's more traditional?
Absolutely.
I am shocked. I am totally shocked. Do you hear that, world?
Wow.
Actually, I think it's going to be extraordinary. And to dovetail on that, one of the things I know Francesco and I have been talking about is sometimes when you strip away the extraordinary experience of an epic full production, what that allows you to do is really focus in on the character relationships, whether that's the drama between characters or the relationships to music or both. And I actually find that it's in some ways a more detailed and intimate experience in terms of being able to absorb what the music and the scope of the evening is. It's very different when you're watching big spectacle than it is when you're really watching two extraordinary artists like Brenda Ray and Scott Quinn or Scott Hendricks really go toe to toe with some amazing scene work and music. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to point out that like Lucia was not always this, beloved staple repertoire piece for many years, for decades. It was just seen as this like hack third-rate piece that was done in Italian theaters. And there's this great quote in this biography of Toscanini where Herbert von Karajan, the famous, was he German or Viennese?
German.
He was a German conductor, said that Toscanini brought the La Scala Orchestra to Vienna, and they were doing all this rep, all different kinds of rep. And he said they were doing like Lucia, and he thought like, why are they doing this third-rate like stock opera that And he went and he played through on the piano. He said, there's nothing really great, but he said,
oh yeah,
and then he said, and it is astonishing that this music, which in a normal repertoire performance, or for instance at the piano, sounds truly banal, was made to sound not at all banal. It was simply another type of music. When one had heard it under Toscanini, it had infinite significance.
That's
and
right.
I think that is such a great way to think about pieces like this. If people go, oh, I've heard Lucia, I've heard Barbara Seville, and like, yeah, it can be really hackneyed and it can be really phoned in. But when you get the right people, these things really have infinite significance.
Okay, Francesco, I guess the bar has been set high.
I read the same book. It's on my nightstand right now.
Okay.
I'm getting T-shirts made that say Opera San Antonio, infinite
significance. I love that.
I love it. That's great. That's fabulous.
That is really I think the point and the real essence of this music is, I've been talking to Tony about this for so long because I'm still only on like page 600 and something of this Toscanini biography. I'm almost done. Right. And I swear to God, when I'm done this book, I'm not going to read another one for a little while. Yeah, but
we should have a little party.
We should have a celebratory party. But reading like the amount of rehearsals that they did, the amount of coaching that Toscanini gave, and anyway, pick anyone from those old days. But I mean, to see the significance with which he and the singers, took every word, every phrase, to have that much focus on connecting to the audience, meaning of the text, finding a way to it's all just communicating the emotion, the feeling, and using, I say in my coachings, every single thing that the composer and the librettist gave you to the very end, all of it. And I mean, that's what those performances, that's the difference between someone doing it in an opera house that is not great at, figuring all that, and someone like Toscanini or whoever, von Karajan or whatever things. That's the difference. And here it's like right in front of you. It's what it is. There's no Wagnerian size orchestra. There's no, it's literally just
pared down to its essence.
It should be renamed something that is like more like voice heavy. You know what I mean? It should be voice responsive, like vocal responsibility. It should be something else, something that's like communicating
instead of what?
More about that. You know what I mean? For the voice and that touching the audience, it should be renamed something like that.
What should be renamed? Like the
bel canto, instead of saying bel canto, beautiful singing. It should be something more about communication, emotion, something else. Anyway,
we'll work on it. Yeah,
we'll work on it. We'll work on it for our
workshop it.
It'll be fine. We'll workshop it.
Well, I think we're in for something extraordinary here, and I cannot wait to get back to the theater. Tony, just before we wrap up, tell us a little bit about what you're up to at Opera Southwest this spring.
Yes, we just produced a version of Lohengrin by a different composer, Salvatore Sciarrino, who's a contemporary Italian composer. It's written for 16 instruments and one singer, and we did it in a storefront that had 3 different rooms. We had strings and flutes and singer in the one room. We had the other woodwinds in the second room, and we had the brass in the back room. And it was all with there were monitors so they could follow me, and we filmed it over a series of days, and we were putting it together. And it's going to be like a live art installation that you can go to in Albuquerque and go into the space, see the set, and hear the opera projected on these big screens. We're going to like let 5 people in at a time, and then we may release it as a DVD. And after that, we're going to be doing our first live performance of 2021 at the Albuquerque Museum. It'll be outdoors, and it's a small Rossini one act. And this was conceived before anyone had ever heard of COVID. We're like, it works out perfect. Like we were always going to do this Rossini one act outdoors in April and May. And it's L'Inganno Felice, Rossini's second one act opera. He wrote 5 one act operas. Right. And every year or every other year, we do these operas with apprentice artists. And I've always wanted to take the apprentice program at Opera Southwest and make it into more than just, glorified chorus member. It's always been a mission of mine to get them to do a fully staged opera with costume, with orchestra, with lighting, with the whole kit and caboodle. And the fact, the first time we ever did it, Lori, was right before you came to Opera Southwest. We did the Cambiale di Matrimonio.
Yes,
love that. The people who sang Cambiale di Matrimonio covered in Lohengrin, that was a lot harder to find people who could sing Rossini and cover Wagner. So this season, they're just doing the Rossini. So we're super excited about it. We got 5 wonderful young singers, and we're just going to keep doing this kind of thing. And then hopefully in September we're back in our theater with a full production of Traviata.
Fabulous. Yay. Well, my hat's going off to all of us as we're reinventing the wheels on what it means to be an opera company during COVID in our various states and residencies, indoor, outdoor, shorter, longer format. It really is, I think, one of the most innovative years, maybe in a very, very long time, certainly within this generation.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you, and we'll cross our fingers for you if you cross your fingers for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, very cross.
That's great. So I want to thank everyone who's watching live, and also for anybody who may be watching later for joining us today. And of course, I can't not thank Maestro Barrese and Maestro Francesco Milioto for joining us and being wonderful guests today. If you are watching, please come see our production of Lucia this spring. As we gear up for our performances on May 6th and 8th, we're going to continue to use this series, Beyond the Production, to invite guests and staff members and artists to help our audience learn more about the production and more about the show. So we hope you'll buy tickets and come on down and join us. And for those of you who are interested, it's super easy to get tickets. You can just head to operasa.org. We have a great variety of price ranges, and it's socially distanced seating. And people are all still required to wear masks so that we stay healthy and safe, even though we're returning to the theater. So once again, those performances are on May 6th and 8th, and you can find tickets at operasa.org. We will be back with Beyond the Production on April 2nd. That's Friday, April 2nd. And we're going to be talking to S. Katie Tucker, who is the projection designer for this production. That's going to be our big artistic imprint on the show for this year. It's going to be how we determine location and emotion and environment. And in my humble opinion, S. Katie Tucker is one of the best in the business. So I think, again, our audience is in for a real treat in San Antonio, being able to experience her work along with yours, Francesco, and your orchestration, Tony. I'm so grateful that you guys could both be here today.
Yay.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I love talking to you guys, and you're 2 of my oldest friends in the opera business, so it's wonderful to do this.
Well, we're lucky to speak with you guys too. For everybody watching this afternoon, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on April 2nd. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.